Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. Today we're taking a look at the wonderful Creative Grids Stripology XL ruler. I love this strip ruler. As always with Creative Grids, they have the underneath where they have the grip built in so it doesn't slide. Well, it's sliding because it's on my paper. But it doesn't slide when it's on your fabric with just a little bit of pressure. I've had other strip rulers, and because they don't have that kind of a built-in grip underneath, I've had them slide on me, and one of the times that it slid, I actually ended up cutting my finger. So I like this one particularly a lot because of the fact that it doesn't slide on my fabric, but also there's so much that I can do with this besides just doing strips. I can do my strips in 1/2 inch increments and in 1/4 inch increments, which I'm going to show you how the possibility of that doing is. They also give you little built-in sheets. I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see this well enough. It's a little bit harder for me with my camera angles and how my phone camera works that I can't zoom in. And this is a long ruler. It's 20 inches. So it's really hard for me to get the whole ruler in and be able to get you close enough to all the markings on here to see everything. But I'm going to do the best that I can to show you. So they have little stars at every 1.5 inch increments. It just makes it easier if you're needing to cut a bunch of strips at 1.5 inches, that you can just go along and you can follow the stars, and it makes it that much simpler for you to be able to go through. It also has squares at every 2.5 inch segment. I find that super handy for me because I do a lot of strips in 2.5 inches. So that really makes it a lot simpler for me. I don't have to sit and, not that I can't because I've been doing it for so many years, but you have to mentally think about 2.5, 5, 7.5, 10, 12.5, so on as you go down through. And I don't even have to think about that with this ruler because I have my squares that show me every 2.5 inch segment where I do my cuts. Also, and I will show you how, since everything is lined up, each slit is 1/2 inch apart. But I will show you how to be able to do your cuts and be able to move your ruler so that you can get your 1/4 inch cuts without any waste of fabric. The other nice thing about the ruler is that on the edges you have a 1/4 inch dotted line and a 1/2 inch dotted line. And this comes in really handy, and it goes all the way up each of the 3 sides. So it goes up this side, across the top, and down the other side. And this comes in really handy when you're trying to square up a finished product that you're getting ready to bind it, a quilt, a table runner, and so forth. That makes it pretty handy to keep a straight edge and keep it guided. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is that the nice thing about Creative Grids is they always give you white lines and black lines, and it helps it to be more visual on your fabric depending on which color fabric you're using. Also, because this has both the strips possibility, with the strips, the nice thing is too, which I'm going to show to you, is that once you cut your strips, you can turn your strips, and then you can cut your squares or your your rectangles rather. You can also use your strips on the 60-degree angle or the 45-degree angle in order to get your diamonds, your triangles, and parallelograms. also, with the square up part, you can do squaring up by inches. Like I said, up to 12 inches. And if you turn your ruler around to the other side, it has guide markings on each side, 4.5, 5.5, out to 12.5. So you can square up on your 1/2 inch. So you have your 1 inch square up on this side, and you have your 1/2 inch square up on this side. It also helps with fussy cutting. So if you wanted to zero in on, say, something particular, like for instance, if I wanted to be able to fussy cut around this sewing machine, and I want to keep my sewing machine straight in my cut up, I'm going to find, you know, visually about where the center of that piece is. And because there is a straight line on the bottom of the sewing machine, I'm able to use one of my lines to go across the bottom of the sewing machine and line this up so that I can cut it out. And it's really just that simple. And then I'll visually take a look at each side. Now say I want to square this up into a 5.5 inch square. I'm just going to go to 5.5 inch on this side and do my cut, and then 5.5 inch on this side. And do my cut. And then I take those two pieces away and I turn my piece. And I'm going to straighten it up so it lines up with my lines. I'm over here trying to see what you're seeing in the camera, which probably isn't a good idea because then I'm not going to line this up right. So I'm going to line it up on my line there. Let me see, I got to find my center here. All right, so there we go. So I have it centered, and I have it lined up on my lines, and I'm making sure up at the top that it's also straight, and I've got it centered where I want to fussy cut. And once again, I'm going to go to my 5.5 inch and my 5.5 inch over here and make my cut. And then I've squared up, or fussy cut rather, my sewing machine so that I can use it in a project. So that's one handy thing, and I do like the fact that it's got both sides that I can use for fussy cutting or squaring up. So if I wanted to fussy cut at, 1 inch increments, I would have used the other side to do that. I had to turn off one of my lights because it was causing a lot of glare onto the ruler, and you were getting too much of that glare into the camera, so it was making a little bit difficult for you to see the ruler itself. So when I'm going to cut strips, now we're going to pretend that my selvage is up here, and this is my fold down here. These are actually 2 pieces of fabric because I didn't want to waste my good fabric for the demonstration, to be honest with you. So you would just fold it up one more time, and you would take your fold that would be in your fabric. And I always recommend to press your fabric first, even press out your fold line from being on the bolt. Completely press it out and then refold it so that you get an accurate fold line. So from, you'll fold your selvage back up to your selvage, just finger press so that you get your fold line, and then you would take that fold line, for our second fold, and you would just fold it up. Now some people want to, they're worried about the width of their fabric, and they're worried about the fact that they have the selvage up here. In order to get a nice accurate fold, it's good to bring it all the way up to the top. Now if you are using solid fabric, which sometimes tends to be wider than our regular quilting fabric, you may need to cut off your selvage ahead of time so that when you fold this up to the line, or up to what would be your selvage, you'll be able to get a straight fold line down here. So now I'm just going to put my, turn this back around. And I always use a solid line, not one of the thicker ones. The thicker ones are to guide you for your fussy cutting, but I rather use either a solid white line to go across the bottom of my fabric, which with a light I have a little bit of an easier time seeing it, so I'm going to use a black one at the moment, just so I can see that a little bit better. And you want your line to be straight all the way from one side of the ruler to the other side of the ruler. And you also want to visually check up at the top to make sure that everything looks even and straight. Now whenever we cut, we're always going to cut at the 0 first, and that takes away any raveling or uneven edges on your edge. And I just slide this out until I can see that I'm going to get all the bad edges, raveling, and that I'm going to get a nice straight cut on that side. And just readjust your ruler to make sure that you have your straight line down here. Now, whether you're left-handed or you're right-handed, doesn't matter. They have your numbers going from 0 to 20. Right-handed, I have my blade on this side here, so I would cut like this. If I was left-handed, my blade would be on the other side, and I'd be using my left hand and I'd be cutting. So it doesn't matter which side you use, left-handed or right-handed with this ruler. You don't have to order a specific one for either one or the other. And I'll show you a couple of other things with the ruler that also make it easy for both left-handed and right-handed users. So we always start at our 0. And one thing in particular that I wanted to point out is they don't recommend for you to use a rotary cutter that you have to push down for the blade to come out, because you will lose pressure quite often as you go. It doesn't come down enough. I think it's because of the slits that the blade doesn't always come down enough, and oftentimes people don't get a full cut, and so they'll find pieces where it didn't cut, and then it messes up your accuracy. So they recommend one where the blade already comes down, and it doesn't matter if it's one like this where the blade is just, something's moved out of the way so that your blade is down, like with the Quilter Select. Or if you use an ergonomical one, that's fine as well. The other thing to remember is that you want to be sure that when you go through, you just take your blade, kind of tip it to the side just a little bit and get it into these little tiny slots down in here. And then make sure that it's in your track of your strip before you push ahead and go and cut. You don't want to have it misaligned, because you could cut into the top of your plastic or cause gashes, and then that messes up your strips. The other thing is that when you're cutting, you want to make sure that as you get wherever you start cutting, so you have your rotary blade at a level, you don't want to tip it up as you go into the middle, because the blade won't completely go through your fabric as well. So you want to make sure that your blade stays even from the beginning to the end, so that you're getting one nice clean cut. And so it's the same with the rotary, with the ergonomical cutters. You want to make sure that when you start, you just tip your blade just a little bit to the side to get it in, because I know I've showed you before to make sure that you don't tip your blade up against your, to one side or the other, up against your straight rulers. But this is just to get it in this little pocket down here. And once you get it in there and you straighten and you feel it sink down in, and you'll get more used to it, so you're doing it quicker and it doesn't take you as long to do it. The same thing is, you want to hold your ergonomical cutter so that it's at a good level. And you want to keep it at that level. As you get to the center, you don't want to tip your arm up, because you will lose some of your cutting blade and it won't go through all your fabric. And you just go ahead and make your cut. And this doesn't have a good blade on it at the moment. So I'm going to redo that cut just to make sure that I go through. Yeah, there was a couple pieces that didn't go through. That blade's really bad, and I need to put a different one in it eventually. I only use that for my batting and so forth. So that would give me my 2.5 inch strip, and I'm going to cut one more because I'm going to use those afterward to show you how to do the diamonds and the triangles. So you just take out your little slip on the end of the 0. Now, in order to do my 1/4 inch cuts, once again, I'm going to line this up so I have my straight line going across my bottom. And I know I don't need to take as much off at the 0 this time because I already have a straight line, but I just want to make sure that my line is nice and lined up. My top is leveled out. And they have some handy charts on the website of the woman that created the ruler itself. She has a website, and there are many charts. There are charts for doing your 1/4 inch increments. There's charts for doing triangles. 60-degree triangles, 30-degree triangles, and 45-degree triangles. There's one for the mini ruler, Stripology ruler, that shows you how to do 1/4 inch increments and 1/8 inch increments. And then there's also a nice chart that shows you what you can get out of a 1/2 yard of fabric, which is really super handy, and I like to have because it's just a quick way to look and see visually. Now, this is also printed on your instructions that you get with your ruler. I couldn't find them at the moment to show them to you, mind you. But it's in a very small print. And anything that is small print for me that I'm going to have to set to the side is not going to be helpful for me. So I went ahead and printed out this chart. And I will give you the link to her website so that you can go and you can print out the charts that I'm showing you that will help you out. And I just kind of set my chart up to the top or to the side where I'm going to be able to see it. So I want to get 2.25 inch sizes for binding. So I do my binding typically in 2.5 inch and 2.25 inch. It just depends on what I'm doing binding on, and I do some smaller binding as well, of course. But Those are my primary choices. So I'm going to cut on my 0, which is where we always start cutting, to get that edge off. And for 2 1/4, it tells me that I need to make a cut at 4 1/2. My next cut would be at number 9. My next cut would be at 13 1/2. And my last cut would be at 18. And I'm just barely going to make it on the 18 with this piece of fabric because I made those other 2 cuts. But I was able to get it. So now you just lift up your ruler, take out that little piece from the 0 that you cut off. And now you're going to slide your ruler to that first dotted line next to your 0. So your 0 down here, you want to slide your ruler over until you're lined up on this side. Making sure I didn't bunch up any of my fabric when I move my ruler. And I want to make sure that that's nice and straight. And I also want to make sure that my bottom line that I was using to stay straight down here is also straight. So you just want to double check always before you cut. And so my second cuts will be, let me see, at 2 inches. At 6 1/2 inches. 11 inches. 15 1/2 inches. My last cut would have been on 20 if I would have had a full length of fabric, but I don't, and I'm not worried about it. I just wanted to show you how to get your 2 1/4 inch cuts. And now each one of my pieces is cut at 2 1/4 inches, and I can go ahead and I can make my binding. This piece is going to be a little bit shorter. That will go into a junk pile. And so now I would be able to go and put these together and make my binding. I'll set those over there. I'll tag those later so I don't forget what I cut them at and what I cut them for. So then, the other thing to remember is that with a 45 millimeter rotary cutter, you can cut through about 4 layers of fabric. With the 60 millimeter, you can cut through about 8 layers of fabric. So the other nice thing about our ruler is that you can stack up your fabrics on top of each other. So even with doing my strips, I could have layered a couple of fabrics on top of each other. I just take and I put one with the fold, and then I'll move it up a little bit and just make sure that it's staying, you know, the same on each end and staying, you know, level to each other. And then I'll do my cut on the 0, and you can go ahead and cut your strips, and then that way you can cut your strips a little bit faster. So if we were wanting to cut squares from our fabric, what I would do is I would line up my fabric on a line on my, I'm trying to see that these 2 pieces are actually lined up to each other down here because of the print. And I was seeing what looked like a double vision to me, so it wasn't lined up well. So line up one on a line, and then line up your other one on a line above it. And you just want to make sure that they're about the same distance on the ends from each other. But you want to make sure primarily that they're straight on a line on your cutting mat. And then you just take your ruler, your Stripology ruler, and they recommend when you pick it up to either pick it up from both sides or pick it up from the center so that you're not disjointing your strips, causing them to get all messed up. And so I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up again, and down here I have I noticed I have my selvage down on this end, so I'm just going to move this down so I'll be getting my selvage off, and I'm lining up this bottom line to make sure that it goes across, and then the next line, I'm making sure that my fabric is nice and straight. If it's not, all you need to do is lift up your ruler. I noticed that I moved my fabric a little bit underneath and it wasn't straight on my line, and I could see that on my ruler that it wasn't straight on my line. And then I'm going to readjust my ruler again and make sure that I have it nicely lined up. And so I want to make sure that this is on a straight line, the bottom of it, and this is on a straight line. And now, once again, I can cut on my 0. This was done at 2 1/4, so I'm just going to, well, I'll do my first cut, which would have been at 4 1/2, then at 9, 13 1/2, and 18. And then I'm just going to take those 2 pieces that I cut off at the 0 and move my fabric just a little bit there. So I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to slide my ruler down to that 1/4 inch mark past my 0. So my 0's here, and I slid my ruler down, and I'm going to make sure that my lines again are straight. And then my next cuts are at 2 inches. You know, when you want to do this stuff on camera, it doesn't go as fast as it does when you're doing it in person. So 6 1/2, then 11, and then 15 1/2, and then at 20. And I'll have a couple little doodads left at that end, and then I have all my little squares. So these are each one 2 1/4 inch squares. Now you can do the same for triangles as well, or rectangles as well. So if I wanted, say, 2 1/2 inch by 6 1/2 inch rectangles, I would have cut my strips at 2 1/2 inches. I would have turned them, lined them up, and then I would cut at every 6 1/2 inch increment. And then it just makes your cutting a lot quicker and easier, especially, you know, when you're doing the 3-yard quilts. And other quilt patterns, it just makes it that much quicker to go through and get all your cutting done, so you can get be able to sit down and put your blocks together and end up with a quilt that much quicker. I don't know about you, but I don't like to stand up for a long time at my table. And right now it's a pretty warm day here in Virginia, and so yeah, I don't want to be standing at my table for a long time. I'd rather be sitting down over there. So now, in order to cut my diamonds, going to do them at a, let me see. See which way is the better way to put my ruler so I can get the better. Let's do them on the 45-degree angle. So I have my 45-degree angle line, and it tells me which one is the 45, and it tells me which one is the 60. So I'm just going to get my 45-degree straight line going across there. I'm going to move this down a little bit more. Try to make sure I'm doing this right, because I don't normally do, I'll be honest with you, I don't normally do my diamonds, and, well, I do diamonds on my cutter, but not very often. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm going to get this the right way. I knew I was doing something wrong. It was messing me up. And it's how I was looking at it. So your 45-degree line would go on the bottom of your strip, not your top. Or at least not yet. I was mixing myself up. So once again, you know, so I have my, excuse me, my ruler, so that my 45-degree line is straight on the bottom of my fabric, and it's extended past my 0. So I'm going to make my first cut at 0, which is what we always do. And these strips were cut at 2.5 inches, so I'm going to make cut at 2.5 inch increments, and I know that by the squares that are on for my marking down here, which makes it nice and simple. So I can get to the 10. I have a tickle in my throat. But as you can see, it's extended past. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this little piece that I cut off. I'm going to take that out, and then I'm going to slide my ruler so that my line is up above. So now my 45-degree line is on the top of my fabric. And my cut piece where I cut at the 0 is lined up with my 0 slot, and there's an extending line that comes down so that I can see that it's lined up nice and straight, and I can see that my 45-degree line is nice and straight up there. I did my last cut on 10. So I'll do my 12.5, which will finish off my diamonds. And now I have 45-degree diamonds. And you could do the same exact thing with 60 degrees. So it just depends on which type of diamonds that you're trying to come out with, whether it's 45 or 60-degree diamonds that you want to use in your project. Now I'll save those aside for probably an applique project and throw away the scraps. So now if I want to do triangles, and let's say that we want to do our triangles at 60 degrees. Let me see. I think I need to use this side first. We'll see how this goes. May have to cut this part of the video out if it doesn't go well. And I'm going to try not to be in the way of the camera while I'm cutting this. So I'm going to move you over just a little bit. And actually I'll readjust this. So let me see. Get this lined up. So I have my 60 degree at the top. And once again, I'm doing 2.5 inch increments. A little hard to do side to side, I can tell you that. There we go. So now I have that done. Now, if everything goes right, if everything goes right, I'm going to get my ruler lined up. So I have my point over here at my 0. I have my 60 degree line here lined up on the bottom. And we shall see. So I'm going to do my first cut at 0. And this if I did this right, it will turn my diamonds into triangles, but we'll see. I'm not used to doing them this way. Let's see if I'm getting it right. And there we go. It did work. Look. I've got little triangles. All nicely, evenly cut out. And there are videos online that are... She has better cameras than I have for where I'm going to leave you a little direction. And this was my 60 degree diamonds and some waste. So that's how to do your diamonds and your triangles. So the next thing that I wanted to be able to show you was if you want to take a square and you wanted to cut it in half, And you can do this on the 0 side, which is, would be more handy for a left-handed user. A right-handed user would use the 20-inch side. And you have a couple of guides to help you. So you have this line right here. Let me see if you're, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see this well. You have this white line that jets out to the side. And then you're going to have your other white line, dotted line going this way, diagonally. And I'm going to line my ruler up so that that dotted line is straight on this edge, and that white line that's jutted out to the side past the 20, like in an angle, is level on this side, so it's straight on that side. And so then I'm going to cut, wait a minute, let me take a look. I'm going to have to readjust this. Let me see. This looked perfectly well in her video, mind you. I think she did it with a different side. Oh, no, wait a minute. I probably just don't have it lined up well enough. Because it should be lining up. Ah, there we go. You know, I don't think that square is straight. Let's get a straight square before we start. Because that definitely was not straight. So I'm going to bring this down to a 6-inch square. And I'm just going to turn my fabric and line it up again. You always want to make sure that you keep an eye on your fingers, that your fingers don't get in the way and end up getting cut. Because these blades on these rotary cutters is pretty darn sharp. Okay, let's try it again. It's not helping me either that I don't have my other light on. So I can't see. Okay, so now I have my dotted line straight on this line. I have my other angled line going that way straight. And I would do my cut on my 20. And then when I take my pieces apart, I have an equal triangle on each side. So that's a good way to be able to cut your square in half. And it needs to be a square in order for that to work. So the other thing that I was looking at today was being able to square up blocks. Now this is a 6.5-inch half square triangle. And it's throwing me off just a little bit because I don't have I can't see with my lights being down, but if I put my light up, excuse me, then it glares on it and you can't see it. So it's just going to take me a second to adjust this. So you have two dotted lines. You have a center point here, and you have a crisscross line. And I'm using this line in my seam, and I'm checking my 6.5 on this side and my 6.5 inch on this side. And maybe this was supposed to be 7. I think this was supposed to be a 6.5 inch. Square. Let me check this just to be sure that I'm cutting it right. Yes, it's supposed to be 6.5, so let me get that back up there. I'm getting glare from this side on the other opposing side of me. So that's not helping me a lot to line it up. So I'm going to get that dotted line. I have my center point here. I know that when I'm squaring up, I'm only going to be taking slivers off. And I fold it over my fabric. That's probably not helping me either. Let me fix that, and I'm going to line it back up. I'm looking at my 6.5 because I have my little... Let me see if I can get this in here better, because I want to make sure that you're being able to see what I'm doing. So I have my 6.5 number right here, a little square box that says 6.5 in it, and I have a square box on this side that says 6.5 in it. And I want that dotted line to be right on my seam. And I know that I'm only going to be taking just a little tiny bit off each side. So once I have that lined up, I'm going to do my cut on my 6.5 on this side. Get my rotary cutter in there. There we go. And then my 6.5 on this side. And then I'll take those little extra pieces off. I know they went somewhere. And you're not taking a lot off when you're squaring up. You should only be taking small amounts off. Now I'm going to flip my square so that it's going the other way. Let me see if I flipped it the right way. I'm telling you what. And it also helps you to find, you know, I can use my diagonal line on this side of my project to make sure that I'm getting it lined up with each of my corners of my block. And then make sure that this dotted diagonal line is lined up with my seam. And then once again, I'm going to do my cut at 6.5 on there and 6.5 over here. And then that squares up my half square triangle for me. And you can do it on the other side for the whole inches as well. It's just typically most blocks, or at least most that I have done, have been on the 1/2 inch because of your seams. So say I want to square up a larger block, and this one I do have a center point, a center seam going this way, and a center seam going down that way. I can just find my center dot right there and line that up with my center. Make sure that my horizontal and vertical lines are lined up on my seams, going this way and going that way. And I'm going to be squaring this up. I'm telling you, today, there. I folded up my fabric under there. I'm going to square this one up to 11.5 inches. So I'm going to take some off that side And I'm going to take some off this side. Take those two pieces out. And then once again, I would turn my block to the side, just one turn to the side. And I'm going to line it up one more time, making sure I have my center point in the center. I have my lines on my seams lined up well. And I always like to double check before I cut. And I'm going to cut on each of the 11.5 markers on here again. And now my block is perfectly squared to 11.5 inches. So this really comes in handy for squaring up your blocks. It can help you and aid you on your finished product when you're getting ready to do your binding. Just square it up. It helps with doing your strips. You can do your rectangles and your squares much quicker. The other nice thing about this ruler is that you can also do bias binding on it as well. And there's a whole tutorial on that is separate. And I haven't done it with this ruler yet, but I just found out today that it is a possibility with this ruler to do the bias binding, which is just awesome to find out that you can do that. So I'm going to practice that a little bit before I try to show that to you on the ruler, but because I'm not a professional with the ruler, it's just one of my favorite rulers. I'm still learning a lot about it. There are a lot of tutorials on YouTube for the Stripology ruler. It's very extensive, the amount of stuff that you can do with them. So I was just trying to give you a little bit of a preview today, so you can see a little bit about it. Often I think people don't end up getting the Stripology ruler because they're afraid that it's too complicated. They see all the lines on it, and more on the XL than on the regular one. The regular one doesn't have the square up lines on it, so it just has your slits and it has your 45 and 60 degree lines. So it doesn't look as complicated as this one does. The XL looks a lot more complicated. Some has to do, for me right now, my lighting, because I normally have my backlighting, which shines down and helps me to tell the difference between the lines on my ruler and the lines on my cutting mat. And I wasn't able to have those on because if I have them on, it's going to glare for you, and that would be a problem. So through the next few months, I'm going to be taking a lot of my Stripology rulers, ones that make different blocks and do different helpful things for us, and I'll be doing some tutorials on them. So I hope that you'll join me back, and once I do better with the, or practice with the bias binding, cutting it on here, I had watched, I did some reading on it and whatnot, and found that it was going to be a lot easier. One of my friends said that they do theirs on it, so we'll see. And I'll be doing that coming up. So if you found this tutorial helpful, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Seaside Quilting Seaside Quilting Supplies channel on YouTube. And also there's a little bell next to the subscribe button. If you click on that, you can change it to all, and you'll be notified each time that we come out with a tutorial. And we have different playlists that make it a little bit easier for what you're trying to find. And I'm sure that we're going to end up having one on rulers in particular, because I'll be doing quite a few rulers coming up and showing you different varieties of rulers, what their capabilities are, why I have picked them out to be a little more handy, and not just the creative grid rulers, but there are some other really unique rulers out there, specialty rulers that we carry at Seaside Quilting Supplies that I think you would be very interested in having. So look for them coming up. So I wish you all happy sewing.